The panelists this evening, starting with Andy Pesco, who's an angel investor and also a partner at the law firm Goldman, etc. Charlie O'Donnell, who's with First Round Capital, who's also the CEO of Path 101 and a faculty member here at Fordham. Brian Cohen, who's the vice chairman of New York Angels. Brendan Burns, who's with Stepping Stone Capital, managing director. Steve Brotman, who's the managing director of Greenhill Venture Partners, and Bill Benedict, who's the CEO of Alpine Meridian and an angel investor. We also will have the startup entrepreneur presenting tonight, Russell D'Souza, who's over here, and he is a twice-over entrepreneur. He's a Dartmouth alum, and he'll talk to us about his business in just a few minutes. But let's first get started with Andy Pesco, who will tell us a little bit about what he looks for when he invests in startups.
Hi, I'm Andy Pesco. I am a serial angel investor of about 25 years, which actually is sort of a long time. People don't last that long, continuing to plow their own money back in again, but I always do. I come about investing rather naturally as a young lawyer. I quickly discovered that I had no advantage in investing in public companies and felt that I had a much greater advantage in understanding how early stage companies work and how to take advantage of that. I also had a lot of friends who had crazy ideas who dared me to take a plunge and make a bet, which I eventually did. And the most important moment was I once had a CEO client who asked, are you willing to invest in my company? You always hint you are. And I said, well, I'll think about it. And then she said, okay, is that long enough? Because we have to make payroll today. And I helped them make payroll. And then the next time I made the entire payroll. It was a small company. And then we sold the company 12 years later for 130 times what we'd invested at. But still, it was a very long, painful road. And during that time, I really learned to plow a lot of my own money in. I'm a little different, I think, than most investors, that I'm more focused on companies than products. I'm very nervous about a product. A company that has one great product, the odds that I'm right and they're right, both I just feel are awfully small. So I'm looking for a breadth, and the breadth really gets described by flexibility. If a company, if I believe that they would have the guts to change their own technology roadmap, change their own management, respond to the whims of the VC community and government regulation, all those things change all the time. So flexibility is the main thing I focus on. I try to assess management. That's a hard thing to do. I guess Elizabeth mentioned we could tell you our favorite questions to ask early stage entrepreneurs. My favorite is always to ask them, who's your most fearsome competitor and why? And of course, the answer is always there's no one, or they describe one and say why they're going to kick that competitor's butt. And then I say, okay, now imagine that one that you couldn't beat. And you have an interesting exchange. I also always like to know, we won't get a chance tonight to ask this guy, what does your team lack? Because understanding how what they think is necessary to succeed tells an investor a lot. I'm always looking for markets, plural. As I said, part of looking for companies, I'm afraid of markets. And I'm looking for sustainability. And I'm looking to find people I can follow and trust. Usually it's a founder or a visionary for a company that I think is worthy of loyalty and trust, and that's something I'm always focused on. Thank you.
Hi, Charlie O'Donnell, First Round Capital. So First Round is a kind of unique fund. We are about a $130-ish million venture fund, but we act more like angel investors. We're willing to write very early, very small checks of just a couple $100,000. And so we're investing when startups are pretty raw, and the one thing we're absolutely certain of is that the entrepreneur is wrong, and probably so are we. What I feel like I'm judging is how wrong are you? And if you had to be wrong in a market, is this the kind of market you want to be wrong in? Is there enough room for you to pivot? And is this the type of entrepreneur to sort of recognize failure, pivot early, listen to the right folks, or have an internal compass that's going to lead them to some yet undetermined area which will make them successful. Customer acquisition is a big thing. I think whether it's offline or online, lots of people spend all sorts of time, building the next best thing, do this big launch, open the door, and then find out that there are no customers, or they can't figure out how to find them. That's probably one of the biggest challenges. How do we get people in the door to whatever you've just built? It could be the greatest thing since sliced bread, but nobody knows about it on day one. So that's pretty important too. I like to find again, at the stage that we're investing in, team is so incredibly important. Even if it's incomplete, are you the right person for this challenge? And every challenge is unique. If this is the kind of market that is just a sort of blocking and tackling sales game, do you have that sales DNA on the team? And if not, how do you propose to get it, or does your partner have it, or that sort of thing? So I'm really looking to try and get to know the entrepreneur as much as possible. A lot of the meetings that I have with folks and interactions are not necessarily around pitches like this. They're much more informal. And it's I think a lot of this is a function of relationship.
And over to Brian.
Yeah, I'm Brian Cohen. I'm Vice Chairman of New York Angels. I'm born and raised in New York and an entrepreneur myself. When I was in graduate school, it was pretty much the beginning of the computer industry up in Boston. Silicon Valley didn't exist. And I was in a technical master's program in the communications area, sometimes called marketing, sometimes called PR. And my professor, who I became very close friends with, said, there's this computer industry, it's growing up here around the Route 128 belt, maybe you can offer some advice. So I decided I'd go out and I would talk to some of these young companies like Digital Equipment Corporation, Data General, Prime, Apollo Computer, some companies that most people unfortunately don't remember. And when I went back to see my professor, he said, they could probably use some help. There's no publications yet in the computer industry. Maybe we can start a publication for these people with this computer stuff. Before that, it was electromechanical design. And he said, Brian, I'm going to give you a piece of advice, and I think it's a good piece. He said, Brian, never ever work for somebody. It's the closest thing to slavery. I was 22 years old, I'm out, about listening and learning in the early days of the computer industry. He tells me this. So I took his advice, and I left graduate school, started a small publishing company up in Boston, ended up starting the first computer publications, came down to New York, started a couple of computer publications, Information Week magazine, among many others. But what I learned is that many of the young companies in the industry needed more advice. So I left the publishing business and started the first science and technology digital public relations marketing agency in the United States. Built it to about 300 employees and sold it to Ken Erickson, and retired right before the boom. So one of the things I could say is sell high. Selling in 1998 was a good time. But what do you do when you now need to learn to sail? You never did anything in the water, where you start investing. So friends of mine talked about angels. And as I began to sort of look at the angel business, I wondered, was this sane? The statistics bear out now that nobody can choose, no matter how smart you may think angels are or VCs are. The smart ones will tell you the ones who succeed when they succeed, but all the statistics tell you that you really can't choose. So I really want to provide some input that relates to things that you may not understand about talking to angels and raising money. Within the context of angels, they are generally entrepreneurs themselves, so they can identify with you. That's important. You can't talk to angels the same way you talk to VCs. So I tend to look at a pitch and ask, did you modify this pitch for the angels? Because we're different. We don't invest the same way. We don't ask the same questions. Our motivations are different. And I'd say about 90% of the time the answer is, no, we look at you as just money people. You give us money. You'll help us. I said, no, we're vastly different. We, as angels, are much more behavioral. And as angels, we give you our money. It's ours. From the VC standpoint, they're caretakers of other people's money. So that's a big issue as well. Now, having also come from the communications world, where everything today is now sort of truncated down from the 24-month I would say launch period down to like a 2-minute launch period, I also look for savvy about communications, public relations, that they've got to take that seriously. And I ask them a lot of questions. Okay, you have a chart, there's a number next to it. $1 million for PR marketing. I said, do you know anything about it? No, but we'll hire somebody to tell us something. Well, that is probably, I believe, one of the most crucial elements of their success. It sits right next to their technology. It sits right next to the teammanship of the organization. So that's another thing I look for. And as noted by Charlie, I also want to know, have you lived with your customer? Have you lived with it? Have you breathed their air? You rub up against their bellies, navel to navel. And most of the time they don't. So that's a suspicious issue I have. And the other point is regarding their idea, my last point, is that I would say 50% of the time, what we invest in isn't what they are a year later. That's a pregnant pause. They have to have the ability to be iterative and smart enough to change what they're doing when it's not what they should. And I look for that. That's kind of hard to find, but we try and find that in people as well.
Thank you. I'm still, so a long time ago, Steve Brotman and I started a company together. It was his idea, but I got to go. We did. I got to go along for the ride, and I'm happy to say we're still close friends. Probably better friends today, 15 years later or whatever. But I'm really disturbed by the visual image of going navel to navel with Steve. I'm having a little bit of trouble getting past that. Anyhow, I'm a professor at Columbia Business School today. I teach entrepreneurship. I've been doing that for 6 years. But more importantly, I'm a proud Fordham alumnus. I was on the unique 6-year program. I graduated from Rose Hill in 1990. So I have many fond memories of Fordham. It's a great place. And I'm thrilled to be here. My day job, however, is I'm a managing director and the founder of a merchant banking firm called Stepping Stone Capital Partners. And what we do, and the reason why we're different, is we are extremely hands-on. We do what we call full life cycle value creation. What that means is we get in bed with the entrepreneur, table to table, and we try to own the problem with them, all the way from a very early stage of startup till the time they're ready to seek an exit. And we try to be their partners as they're exiting that project. And what you find is, in fact, how many of you in the audience have been to the Cohen Foundation website? You got to go. It's a great resource, okay? But there's a great study on it right now that they funded about angel investing. And one of the things it shows is positive correlations between in angel investing and IRRs are amount of time spent on due diligence, amount of time, face time in the office with the entrepreneur on a day-to-day basis, and knowledge of the industry. So not rocket science, but it really works. My comments that I want to make are really from the point of view of the entrepreneur. And I look for entrepreneurs who are extremely eyes wide open about these kind of issues. So before you start, you need to adjust your mentality to reality. All right, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. And I've got some hints for people in the audience who are either in businesses or thinking about it. What that really means is you need to organize your life in a way to be low cost. You've got to give yourself a chance to be successful. And one of the things that I always tell my students is success in entrepreneurship is often about surviving long enough for everybody else to figure out the great idea. Okay? There's a lot that's inherent in that comment, but I really believe it to be true. You've got to mentally and emotionally commit to the long-term process. It's iterative. I'm going to give you a quick example. I assume most of you know the company, theladders.com. Okay? So Mark Senadell is a friend of mine. When he was starting that business, we were talking about it. He did, the whole startup process was in his apartment. Okay? He built the website himself. He did the initial email newsletter and built that list himself. He did the whole startup process for $30,000. You know, it's an extremely successful, profitable business today. Now here was a guy who made a lot of money already. He'd had a couple successful businesses, Harvard MBA, but he organized his life in a fashion in order to be successful. Once you start, first thing, and this is going to sound redundant, but it's true, just start. You have to do something. You know, too many people get fixated on, I've got to have the perfect idea. Ideas are cheap. Okay, execution, priceless. Business plans are important, but they're really just the beginning of the roadmap. Don't get fixated on the perfect ideas. What happens is, as you move along, you begin to gain unique insights. And the whole goal, to me, of the first 50% of any entrepreneurial process is the goal of gaining unique insight. Because once you get that, then you can answer the question of what real value is. That's how you get your value equation. Then you got to get money and execute against that. Okay. The takeaway there is, don't fall in love with your initial idea, but become completely committed to the process of exploring its long-term viability, and you get the unique insight. The last couple comments I want to make are really just about reading materials for people. A lot of people say, how do I get going? How do I get started? A couple things that I love. One of the best business books I've ever read is Larry Bossidy's book, Execution. It's about doing. And it's a philosophy for managing a business, and it's totally applicable to small enterprises or big enterprises, but it's about doing. Guy Kawasaki's Art of the Start, I think, can be a little bit trite, but it's worthwhile reading, and it's a way to organize your activities around business. I used the term unique insight a couple times. Malcolm Gladwell, many of you probably saw this, but had an article in the January 18th, 2010 New Yorker called The Sure Thing. It's about the process that people go through to gain that unique insight. He cites two famous examples, John Paulson in the mortgage crisis and Ted Turner. Get the article and read it. It's really, really good. And the last person I'm going to tell you to go look at is Seth Godin. A lot of things Seth writes are great. And one of the great things about it is it's free. A couple years ago, he published a great kind of PowerPoint called the Bootstrapper's Bible. I'm pretty sure you can still find it online. It's great though. So go get the Bootstrapper's Bible and look at other stuff that Seth has. And good luck.
There's a question here. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. Brenda mentioned we founded a company out of Columbia Business School there. Everyone hear me okay? Hello? Okay, good. Early rooms here. Okay. So Brenda mentioned we started a company about 15 years ago called Ad One, and eventually we brought in our professor to help us out, and which was not really the best move, but ended up okay. We ended up selling the business a few years later. We went belly to belly with a lot of not just customers, but angels as well, including a high school friend of mine, J.B. Pritzker, who taught us a lot about angel investing. I think pretty much everyone's different, I think, in the angel world. And have, that's a whole other conversation, I think. But, having been an entrepreneur, raised capital, and successfully exited, entered the venture capital industry pretty naively with about $1 million in capital. Our first investment was about a $250,000 investment in a company called Live Person. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of it, but they went public about 18 months after we invested. And it was a tech-enabled service, a lot like the company Brenda and I founded, and which is sort of what people call SaaSes or ASBs. I'm throwing a lot of words out there, but if you're in the tech industry, it's applications that ride on the internet. So for the last 15 years, that's all I've done, is invested in tech-enabled services, business information services, and applications that ride over the internet, primarily on the business-to-business side. We tend to steer clear of the business-to-consumer side, although we do some consumer investing. There's a lot of reasons why. That's where our focus is, but pretty much it's what we know, it's what we understand, it's what we get. It's what what we've done our entire careers, and it's driven a lot by the strength of New York. I know it sounds strange to talk about strength and technology in the same phrase as New York, but the reality is that New York is is a huge beneficiary of the commoditization of technology. So as chips and bandwidth and hardware continue to fall in price, what does that mean? If they go asymptotically to zero, it means that the true opportunity is what rides on top of that bandwidth. Even if you think about television, it's not the maker of the television box. Well, at one point in time, that was a very profitable business, selling boxes. It's what's coming through those pipes on those screens that's of value, and that's a huge strength in why New York is going to be the next Silicon Valley. I know people are going to laugh and chuckle about that, but this is almost inevitably true because this city has all three of the biggest industries here focused. You've got publishing, advertising, and information services. Bloomberg is the biggest, most successful entrepreneur that New York never thinks about as an actual entrepreneur. He's an information service guy who rode that same path. And it's easy to forget that this is the case when you read about Silicon Valley. Even the New York Times spends more time, except recently there's been a couple articles on Boston or Silicon Valley, not so much on New York. And my fund, Greenhill SAVP, has really ridden that wave through the past 15 years. We invest from the seed stage. We do between 8 and 10 seed stage investments in each fund, and we do about 15 to 16 core investments in each fund. We invest probably in 3 to 6 deals every year, and we're looking for opportunities, and our investment size is anywhere from $250,000 to $750,000 for a seed stage investment, up to initially $1 to $5 million, and we'll invest up to $10 million, depending on if the opportunity requires it. So that's our story. I think to throw in something for entrepreneurs, I think the number one thing we look for, aside from the domain expertise that some of the panelists mentioned here, is simplicity. Is that aside from really knowing the customer, you have to be able to present a simple opportunity so that you can sell that customer, so that you can recruit people, and so that you can convince investors of whatever stripe that this is a phenomenal opportunity, and take whatever you have that's complicated and try and make it a relatively simple opportunity so that everyone in your ecosystem can understand when you talk to partners and everything else. And the biggest mistake I think angel investors and VCs make is investing in too complicated businesses. But also a big mistake that entrepreneurs make is trying to complicate what they're doing. And what you really want to do is make it as simple as possible so that anyone can grasp what you're doing. And key mistake, and key success factor, I think, is that if you can recruit great people, if you can raise money, you can get customers and great partners, it all flows from how simple that opportunity is, that idea is. And anyways, so thank you.
Then over to you, Bill, and maybe one thing that we didn't talk about was what we look out for, in addition to what we look for. So maybe you can touch on that.
Yeah, here you go. Is this thing working?
Now.
There we go. I'm Bill Benedict. Our firm is Alpine Meridian. We're a merchant bank, and we're involved in information services, digital media, online advertising, transaction processing, and we have some venture investments, we have some angel investments, and we work with companies helping raise capital and are on a bunch of boards similar to some of these gents here. So what I thought I would do quickly is give you a couple of, because Liz had asked for this, a couple of examples of investments that we've made and kind of combine those with things that we either do not look for anymore, that we found, unfortunately, and also things that we do look for. So one thing that I don't look for anymore is strategic investors in a deal. A number of years ago, we invested in a company and the other investors on the same terms were Microsoft, Deutsche Telekom, HP. That company's worth 10% of what we put into it currently. Because strategic investors have a lot of, if investing for a financial return, big companies have a lot of other reasons why they want to invest that may not be congruent with yours. Don't invest in a company that where there's somebody that's made lots of money and is famous for making money doing something else. I made an angel investment in a company a bunch of years ago that George Soros had invested in. And so he's got a $25,000 t-shirt also, which is what I came ordering.
That's why I don't take t-shirts.
Right. And yeah, to that point, also don't look for companies that are run by somebody that's only run very large businesses and has never run a small company. Just after investing in this business, this guy had run a large division of Lockheed Martin. He said, well, we're having this board meeting in New York and we're going to be going to a really great restaurant. And I said, you know, just to sort of reorient stuff, this is our money that this is my money that's being spent at dinner here, so let's go to a cheap restaurant. Things that we do look for, we invested with about 6 other people, $275,000 about 6 or 7 years ago in a company called Industry Brains, which is similar to Google AdSense, and with a great operator, a guy named Eric Matlick, that now runs a company called Madison Logic, and he sold it for $35 million 6 years later, 3 years later, rather. And so one of the things, a couple of things that I found there is, number one, when you've got a business where one person or 2 people own most of the company or a majority of the company, stuff gets done a lot faster because you have people on the board, they're helpful, they contribute, but at the end of the day, everybody knows that someone's the boss and whatever they want to do is going to be that's what happens. And so things move along at a much faster clip than they would otherwise. This is also a guy that had revenues, a few of them, he had a few customers before any money went in. And things change, but you don't spend the first year and 90% of the money trying to get the first customer. I also look for somebody that, either somebody or a couple of people or a team that's able to do pretty much everything the company needs to do to get a customer and implement what they want to do the first day. So, and hopefully they've worked together before. At the other end of the spectrum, we invested in a company called Hawkeye a number of years ago. It was a telecom business, and it was the guy that started it had sold a couple of telecom businesses before, and we put in, I think it was $1 million, and the company did not do well for a very long time. But this is a guy that had sold a couple businesses before, and he was able to talk AT&T into buying the business, and it was very successful for everybody. So occasionally you can get somebody occasionally the market is such that everybody wants your business and everyone's desperate to buy it. That usually never happens to you, though. Somebody needs to be able to sell a business. And lastly, we invested in a company called Certify, which is an expense management software business, and it's a couple of guys that have done it before. It's 2 brothers, they've started a business, they built it up, they sold it for a 10x return, and they have a group of people, and there are a lot of mistakes and a lot of things you learn the first time you do something. And the second time, you get to take advantage of that. And I guess the last thing is, you look for somebody that you like, because there's really not a lot of point investing in a business in an industry about which you know nothing, because you're not adding anything. And if you want to add something, you're only going to be able to do that if there's some chemistry and you get along with the person that's running the business.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. And what we're going to do now is actually have the panelists move to the audience and hand the baton over to Russ, who's going to do his presentation. And after that, the investors will stay in their seats in the audience and ask us questions, and then return back to their main seats.
I'll wait a second till I can get settled. This is on, right? Hey guys, how are you? I am Russell D'Souza. I am the co-founder of SeatGeek. And SeatGeek is a web application that forecasts how sports and concert ticket prices move on the secondary ticket market. And by secondary ticket market, I'm talking about the $15 billion a year market led by companies like StubHub, eBay, RazorGator, Craigslist, etc. So I thought in order to illustrate our service, I would start with a quick example. So here's an example of how of ticket prices for a Boston Red Sox New York Yankees game. And you see the ticket prices climb steadily up till about 3 weeks before the game. And we cut it off here at an interesting decision point. If you ask most people to look at this data and what they would do, almost everyone would buy tickets now. They'd say, look, ticket prices rose prior to this point. I should buy my tickets. Well, in this particular case, ticket prices